A heavy woven bag pulled from the freezing Huangpu River revealed the chilling mystery of a vanished woman 8 months pregnant. When genetic testing identified a notorious criminal as the father, his ironclad alibi completely baffled detectives, exposing a twisted web of double lives and a missing floral blanket. Please like and subscribe to join us on this case. This video contains chilling secrets. Viewer discretion is advised. The Huangpu River is often referred to as the Mother River of Shanghai. It stretches for roughly 70 miles, boasting an average width of 1,300 feet and a depth of almost 30 feet. It serves as a crucial waterway, connecting the bustling metropolis of Shanghai to the immense Yangtze River and the East China Sea. This river does not merely span physical geography, it flows through the complex history of the city. Yet, underneath the glistening reflections of the modern skyline, the water conceals countless secrets. Almost 14 years ago, these murky waters became the stage for a crime so gruesome that merely mentioning it sends shivers down the spines of the locals. The brutal methods of the killer left seasoned investigators deeply disturbed. What exactly happened, and what dark motive could drive a human being to commit such a vicious act? On the morning of May 17, 2010, two municipal sanitation workers, Xiao Shen and Mrs. Li, began their routine shift. Their assignment was to clear debris near the historic Huangpu dock. As they worked, Xiao Shen noticed an unusual object bobbing in the gentle currents. It was common to see discarded trash, but this object struck him as distinctly strange. It was not a standard garbage bag. Something about its heavy, unnatural movement gave him a profound sense of unease. He called out to Mrs. Li. Together, they extended the long poles they used to fish out floating trash, hooking the object and dragging it toward the embankment. They saw it was a large, patterned, woven bag. Driven by a cautious curiosity, they decided to open it. The moment the heavy fabric was pulled back, a scene of absolute horror was revealed. Inside the bag was a human torso. It was missing its head, arms, and legs. Despite the overwhelming shock, Mrs. Li managed to maintain her composure, immediately dialing the authorities on her cellular phone. At 23 minutes past 9 in the morning, the Shanghai police arrived. The wailing sirens had already drawn onlookers. To preserve the scene, officers established a wide perimeter, evacuating all unauthorized personnel. After taking statements and confirming the location, the investigation formally commenced. The immediate priorities were a preliminary forensic examination and a sweeping search of the river. Forensic experts documented the contents. Aside from the mutilated torso, investigators found two smaller mesh bags and a floral-patterned blanket. Wrapped inside was a collection of women's clothing and rubber gloves. Based on the size, police deduced these garments belonged to the victim. One chilling detail stood out. The killer had callously tied the bag shut using a woman's dress and denim jeans. The victim was identified as a young female. The preliminary autopsy provided a tragic profile. She was estimated to be between 22 and 28 years old, standing approximately 5 feet 3 inches tall. The medical examiner determined the remains had been submerged sometime between December 2009 and February 2010, pinpointing her murder window. However, the most heartbreaking revelation was yet to come. The police had not merely recovered one victim, they recovered two. The autopsy revealed the young woman was heavily pregnant. The unborn child was determined to be at approximately 8 months of gestation. At 8 months, a fetus is fully formed. This devastating fact sent shockwaves through the investigative team. A cold-blooded killer had brutally extinguished 2 lives. Investigators turned their attention to the clothing. The garments covered all 4 seasons, indicating the victim was not a recent migrant, but someone who had lived in Shanghai for at least 2 to 3 years. The clothing consisted entirely of cheap, budget-friendly brands. An analysis of wear patterns indicated the clothes were genuinely old from frequent use. These socioeconomic clues led police to believe the victim struggled financially. Discarding her clothing alongside her remains suggested a desperate attempt to erase her identity. It also allowed investigators to rule out robbery. A woman with limited means would not be a prime target, and an 8-month pregnant woman could not realistically fight back. There would be absolutely no reason for a thief to escalate the crime to a brutal murder, let alone go through the exhausting process of dismembering the body. The working theory quickly shifted to a crime of passion or a deeply personal conflict. The killer was almost certainly someone intimately acquainted with the victim. To uncover the truth, the police knew they had to give this young woman her name back. Once identified, they could map out her social circle and hunt down the suspect. Guided by this strategy, search efforts intensified. Utilizing data on the water velocity of the Huangpu River, marine experts calculated a search radius of roughly 1.5 miles upstream and downstream from Shilupu Dock. The police mobilized specialized teams and dispatched divers to scour the depths of the river and the intersecting Suzhou Creek. They prayed they would find the missing remains or any crucial piece of evidence, but despite 2 full days of exhausting searching, the dark waters yielded nothing more. Identifying the victim based on generic clothing proved impossible, comparable to finding a single grain of sand in the vast East China Sea. Investigators aggressively pivoted to missing persons records within Shanghai, uncovering 150 women whose physical descriptions matched the victim. Detectives visited every family, collecting 211 genetic samples to compare against the remains. Every result came back negative. Refusing to surrender, they ran the victim and the unborn child's genetic profiles through the National Law Enforcement Database. The system returned 0 matches. Every investigative avenue dissolved into a dead end. Desperate, the police focused on the victim's advanced pregnancy. Investigators fanned out across 14 maternity hospitals spanning 8 districts in Shanghai. They meticulously screened 4,023 women, officially registered as pregnant and due to give birth between December 2009 and March 2010. Officers made over 4,000 individual phone calls to verify their welfare. To their immense disappointment, all the women were accounted for, alive and completely healthy. With traditional groundwork failing, the task force turned to mass media. They distributed 25,000 flyers across the city, generating nearly 100 tips. Each lead was rigorously verified and ruled out. One tip seemed promising. A woman named Zhou Muyan had been reported missing in July 2009 while 3 months pregnant. Her physical attributes and pregnancy timeline aligned perfectly with the medical examiner's estimates. However, because she was adopted, investigators could not rely on genetic testing from her parents. After 2 grueling weeks, detectives located Zhou Muyan alive in Suzhou, living peacefully with her newlywed husband. As leads disintegrated, the investigation stalled. The police faced intense public criticism regarding their perceived incompetence. 5 agonizing months passed with no developments. Then, a massive turning point arrived on October 18, 2010. During a routine cross-reference check at a provincial crime laboratory in Jiangsu province, forensic technicians discovered a direct match. It was not for the deceased mother, but for the unborn child. They had successfully identified the biological father. The man was a 35-year-old named Yang Erzhen. He had been arrested on April 14th for running an illegal gambling operation, which entered his genetic profile into the system. A background check revealed he was a notorious gang member with a violent criminal record, including sexual assault, extortion, false imprisonment, and mandatory drug rehabilitation. His genetic markers were not stored in the national database previously because the centralized system did not exist during his earlier crimes. Due to local administrative delays, his information was only uploaded in October, triggering the delayed alert. A team of Shanghai detectives immediately traveled to Jiangsu. They found Yang Erzhen living comfortably with his wife and their 1-year-old son. When police revealed they were investigating a homicide case involving his illegitimate child, his wife erupted in fury. Yang vehemently denied the accusation. He swore he never engaged in an extramarital affair, possessed zero ties to any woman in Shanghai, and had not left Jiangsu province in years. Confronted with a 99.99% probability of paternity, Yang became highly combative. His relentless denial prompted investigators to demand an urgent secondary test. The results remained identical. The scientific evidence was undeniable. Despite irrefutable proof, Yang stubbornly maintained his innocence. Detectives needed to dismantle his fake alibi. The victim was 8 months pregnant between December 2009 and February 2010, placing conception exactly between April and June 2009. Investigators demanded to know his exact whereabouts during that critical window. Realizing the police would not go away, he finally confessed to a brief trip. He admitted that in May 2009, he and a close friend traveled to Shanghai for business. He insisted he only stayed 2 days and 1 night. To verify this statement, the investigative team split up. One group scoured transportation hubs, searching for travel records. Due to data purging protocols, they could only retrieve records from June 2009 onward. These records corroborated his claim that he had not physically left Jiangsu since that June. Meanwhile, the second unit tracked down the friend who accompanied him. The friend, a man named Liu Ji, was brought into the interrogation room on November 4, 2010. Liu corroborated the trip but accidentally exposed their illicit business. They had journeyed to purchase illegal narcotics. Liu detailed checking into a Shanghai hotel to meet a pregnant supplier known strictly by the street alias Sister Lai. This sparked a new theory. Could Sister Lai be the dismembered victim? However, Liu quickly crushed that hypothesis. He remembered her stomach was already significantly large in May, estimating she was well over 5 months pregnant. The biological timeline simply did not match the remains. When asked if they met absolutely anyone else during that hotel stay, Liu thought for a long moment before shaking his head. According to him, there was no one else. Detectives immediately pulled the guest registry from the Shanghai hotel. The documents confirmed that Yang Erjun and Liu Ji checked into their room on May 11, 2009, and checked out on May 12. Unfortunately, the security cameras were positioned exclusively in the main lobby, capturing a chaotic and continuous flow of tourists and business travelers. It was impossible to isolate who might have gone up to their specific floor. Furthermore, too much time had elapsed for the hotel management and cleaning staff to recall any specific faces or unusual activities from that single night. The physical trail at the hotel had gone cold, leaving investigators with no choice but to forcefully extract the truth from Yang Erjun and Li Ji. Detectives relentlessly interrogated the two men about their illicit enterprise. If neither man knew the true identity of the woman they called Sister Lai, a third party must have brokered the narcotic transaction. Under the crushing pressure of a severe drug trafficking conviction, Yang Erjun finally cracked. He revealed the name of a local hometown associate who acted as their middleman, an unemployed drifter known simply as a Wu, who made a lucrative living connecting buyers with underground suppliers. When A Wu realized the authorities were searching for him, he panicked. Assuming they were closing in on his drug syndicate, he severed contact with his family and rented a cheap motel room on the outskirts of town. His flight was brief. Within 2 days, law enforcement tracked him down and kicked his door in. Once in custody, A Wu frantically tried to downplay his involvement. He explained he merely sourced clients and forwarded their information to a higher-level broker in Suzhou. For his minor role, he received 30% of the commission, while the senior broker kept 70%. Following this new breadcrumb, detectives cornered the senior broker, who quickly traded information for leniency. He revealed that the mysterious Sister Lai was actually Lai Xiaowu, a Suzhou resident in her early 30s. The task force immediately drove to Suzhou, arriving at a surprisingly luxurious 2-story residence featuring a high gate and a private landscaped courtyard. Lai Xiaowu knew the police were there for the drug deal and decided total cooperation was her best defense. She confirmed that, following the middleman's introduction, she traveled to the Shanghai hotel to finalize the sale with Yang Erjun and Liu Ji. However, her testimony contained a bombshell revelation. Recognizing Yang Erjun as a potentially valuable customer, she decided to offer him a complimentary bonus to guarantee his future business. She personally telephoned a young female escort to keep him company for the night. She described the escort as a close working associate in her 20s, originally from Henan province, who went by the street name Xiao Min. The detectives were stunned. There had been a 4th person in that hotel room. They immediately confronted Liu Ji, demanding to know why he had lied about them being alone. Liu Ji, visibly trembling, swore he had not intentionally misled them. He confessed that he had consumed such a massive quantity of narcotics that evening that he was completely incapacitated, blacking out before anyone else arrived. Armed with this testimony, interrogators cornered Yang Erjun. With his lie exposed, Yang Erjun finally admitted that Sister Lai had introduced him to a woman from Henan. Though he remembered her name as Xiao Yue, he claimed they engaged in a single, meaningless sexual encounter, after which she left, and they never spoke again. The investigative team instantly deduced that Xiao Yue and Xiao Min were the exact same person. If this woman conceived a child during that one-night stand in May 2009, an 8-month pregnancy would place her expected due date right around February 2010. This timeline perfectly aligned with the forensic estimation of the dismembered victim's death. Detectives rushed back to Lai Xiaowu, demanding Xiao Min's real name. However, Lai Xiaowu insisted she had no idea. In the underground sex trade, women fiercely guarded their true identities, operating strictly under fabricated aliases to protect themselves and their families back home. The trail to the victim's name was severed once again. Undeterred, the police launched a massive data mining operation, filtering through metropolitan records for young women from Henan province who had frequented that specific hotel district during the stay of Yang Erjun. The search yielded a list of 60 potential candidates. Detectives compiled a photographic lineup and presented it to Lai Xiaowu. Without hesitation, she pointed to one photograph. The woman in the picture was 26-year-old Fan Xuanmin. Investigators immediately contacted the family of Fan Xuanmin in Henan. Her devastated parents explained that their daughter had been working in Shanghai since 2007. She called home regularly, but all communication abruptly ceased in December 2009. They had actually filed a missing persons report with local authorities. However, because she had hidden her pregnancy from her traditional family, her physical description in the system did not include the crucial detail of being 8 months pregnant. Consequently, the Shanghai police had bypassed her file entirely during their initial search. Detectives quickly collected genetic samples from the parents of Fan Xuanmin. The laboratory confirmed a definitive match. The torso pulled from the Huangpu River finally had a name. With the victim identified, investigators reviewed hotel security footage near the lobby entrance. The video confirmed Fan Xuanmin exited the building long before Yang Erjun checked out. Furthermore, employment records proved Yang Erjun had accepted a full-time security guard position in his hometown in November 2009, establishing an ironclad alibi that he had not returned to Shanghai during the murder window. Yang Erjun was undeniably the father, but he was not the killer. The real murderer was still out there, and the hunt was about to accelerate. With the victim officially identified as Fan Xuanmin, the entire trajectory of the investigation shifted drastically. Detectives no longer needed to comb the vast city blindly. They merely needed to trace her footsteps. Detectives contacted the Suzhou broker, Lai Xiaowu, seeking details about the victim's social circle. Though retired from the underground industry, Lai Xiaowu provided social media handles and the names of acquaintances. Armed with this data, the task force tracked down Xiao Jiao, the closest confidant of Fan Xuanmin. Xiao Jiao revealed a crucial, previously unknown detail. Fan Xuanmin was not living alone in some isolated apartment. She had a long-term, significantly older boyfriend, and the two were formally cohabitating as a couple. Digital forensics of her social media corroborated this. A status update posted on January 1st, 2010, read, "I am 8 months pregnant. What should I do? I have never been married, but I cannot bring myself to abort my own child. I plan to give birth to the baby and then give it away to a good family." Detectives scrutinized her private connections, finding a curated list of 14 male contacts. They printed photographs of each man and presented the lineup to Xiao Jiao. Xiao Jiao immediately pointed to a 39-year-old local named Yu Fanrong, identifying him as the live-in boyfriend. Yu Fanrong instantly became the prime suspect. The fact that the woman he lived with, who was carrying a child nearly to term, completely vanished, and he never bothered to file a missing persons report with the authorities, was a glaring and sinister red flag. Officers immediately drove to the primary residence of Yu Fanrong, bracing themselves to confront either a grieving partner or a defensive suspect. Instead, when the heavy front door swung open, a woman answered, politely introducing herself as his legally wedded wife. Investigators were stunned, as Xiao Jiao was certain Fan Xuanmin lived there. Recognizing their confusion, the wife invited them inside to explain the volatile domestic history of her husband. She explained they had been married for years, sharing a middle school-aged son. Both held lucrative corporate positions at a major insurance firm. However, their comfortable life fractured in 2007 when Yu Fanrong began a clandestine affair with Fan Xuanmin. By 2008, the wife discovered the infidelity. Consumed by anger, she packed her belongings, pulled her son out of the home, and relocated to the residence of her mother. The couple formally separated. The moment she vacated the premises, Yu Fanrong brazenly moved his young mistress into the marital home. Through later conversations with her estranged husband, the wife learned that Fan Xuanmin had continued to secretly work as an underground escort despite his financial support. The tension reached a boiling point in July 2009 when Fan Xuanmin suddenly realized she was pregnant. She confessed the pregnancy to Yu Fanrong, adamantly claiming the unborn child belonged to him. The revelation sparked a series of vicious arguments. Yu Fanrong demanded she terminate the pregnancy, while Fan Xuanmin fiercely refused. According to the narrative, Yu Fanrong had fed his wife. The mistress abruptly vanished on January 12, 2010. He claimed that Fan Xuanmin decided to return to her rural hometown to give birth in secret. He told his wife he had given his mistress a massive cash payout as a final severance package. Miraculously, immediately following the alleged departure of Fan Xuanmin, Yu Fanrong experienced a profound change of heart. He showed up at the doorstep of his mother-in-law, begging his wife for a second chance. Swayed by his dramatic displays of remorse, the wife agreed to reconcile. She moved back into the apartment, happily reporting to the police that Yu Fanrong had transformed into an attentive, deeply loving husband. The detectives listened intently, requesting permission to conduct a visual inspection of the apartment. The wife happily consented. The residence featured 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, and a bathroom. It was immaculately clean. Hoping to find a crack in the facade, a detective casually asked the wife if she had noticed anything peculiar when she first moved back into the home. The wife paused, her brow furrowing, and admitted that a few minor things had struck her as deeply odd upon her return. A large, heavy kitchen cleaver, one she used frequently, was entirely missing and had been hastily replaced with a brand new one. However, 2 specific discoveries had genuinely bothered her. First, a distinctive floral-patterned blanket was missing from the linen closet. When she confronted Yu Fanrong, he claimed it had blown off the balcony clothesline on a windy day. Second, while aggressively scrubbing the bathroom tiles shortly after her return, she had found a long, dried streak of blood wedged deep into the grout. Her husband had brushed it off, claiming he had carelessly cut himself while shaving. The mention of a floral-patterned blanket electrified the room. A detective slowly pulled out his cellular phone, displaying a high-resolution photograph of the exact blanket that had been wrapped around the dismembered torso. He handed the phone to the wife. She gasped, immediately confirming it was the identical blanket from her linen closet. The circumstantial evidence was now overwhelming. With the chilling identification of the missing floral blanket, the investigative team possessed the definitive circumstantial evidence required to move against their primary suspect. On October 16, 2010, Shanghai police officially summoned Yu Fanrong for a formal interrogation. The transition from a comfortable corporate insurance executive to a prime murder suspect did not seem to visibly shake him. When placed inside the sterile, windowless interrogation room, under the glaring fluorescent lights, Yu Fanrong adopted a strategy of absolute silence. He was a highly educated, calculating individual who genuinely believed he had successfully outsmarted the criminal justice system. For the entirety of his initial session, he simply stared blankly at the wall, refusing to answer a single question, maintaining a demeanor of arrogant defiance. On October 17th, investigators escalated his legal status to formal criminal detention, a procedural move designed to signal that they were not bluffing. Despite the upgraded charges and the looming threat of a long prison sentence, the suspect remained an incredibly stubborn obstacle. Seasoned detectives noted that his psychological resilience was formidable. When investigators finally forced him to speak, Yu Fanrong maintained a carefully constructed narrative. He admitted to knowing Fan Xuanmen, openly acknowledging their past illicit affair, but vehemently denied any knowledge of a pregnancy. He coldly stated that she had simply packed her belongings and left him of her own volition, retreating to her rural hometown. This was the identical excuse he had already fed his estranged wife. The detectives knew they could not physically force a confession. They needed to deploy psychological warfare to bypass his mental defenses. They recognized that Yu Fanrong was a man driven by profound arrogance and a desperate need for absolute control. On October 18th, the interrogation resumed, but the lead investigator completely shifted the conversational dynamic. Instead of aggressively pressing him about the murder, the detective leaned casually across the cold steel table and questioned the paternity of the unborn child. The detective implied that Fan Xuanmen was notoriously unfaithful, and the baby likely belonged to another random client from her underground escort days. This calculated insult to his ego worked flawlessly. In a sudden, explosive loss of composure, Yu Fanrong slammed his hands violently onto the table and shouted loudly at the detectives. He screamed that if the child was not his, then whose could it possibly be? The interrogation room fell dead silent. The psychological trap had snapped shut. Just 24 hours earlier, Yu Fanrong had sworn on the official police record that he had absolutely no idea Fan Xuanmen was even pregnant. Now, in a blind fit of injured pride, he had just aggressively claimed paternity of the 8-month-old fetus. Realizing the catastrophic error he had just made, the color completely drained from his face. Defeated, physically exhausted, and cornered by his own accidental admission, Yu Fanrong lowered his head into his hands and finally began to narrate the horrific truth. According to his grim confession, the relationship between him and his young mistress had always been deeply toxic, built entirely on a foundation of mutual exploitation. Fan Xuanmen constantly demanded that he permanently divorce his legal wife and elevate her to the status of a legitimate spouse. Yu Fanrong, however, had absolutely no intention of abandoning his comfortable lifestyle or his socially respectable family. The fragile dynamic shattered completely in July 2009 when Fan Xuanmen proudly announced she was carrying his child. Yu Fanrong panicked. He accompanied her to medical clinics, aggressively demanding she terminate the pregnancy. He stated unequivocally that he did not want the baby. Fan Xuanmen, however, saw the unborn child as her ultimate leverage. She stubbornly refused the medical procedure, determined to give birth at any cost, deeply believing the infant would force him to stay committed to her. This fundamental conflict birthed a vicious war inside their shared apartment. For 6 agonizing months, their home became a hostile battleground filled with daily screaming matches and bitter resentments. As her stomach swelled closer to the final month of gestation, the immense pressure on Yu Fanrong reached an unbearable peak. The fatal breaking point finally occurred on the freezing winter evening of January 11th, 2010. Yu Fanrong returned to the apartment utterly exhausted after a grueling day at his corporate office. The very moment he walked through the front door, Fan Xuanmen immediately reignited their perpetual, exhausting argument regarding the unborn child. Drained and desperately seeking peace, Yu Fanrong actively ignored her, refusing to engage in the conversation. His absolute silence infuriated her beyond reason. Feeling dismissed, Fan Xuanmen escalated the confrontation. She began violently screaming at him, calling him a pathetic coward who refused to take responsibility for his own flesh and blood. Her relentless verbal barrage and severe personal insults finally shattered his remaining self-control. Driven by a sudden surge of blind rage, Yu Fanrong stood up quickly and viciously slapped her across the face. The physical strike ignited a chaotic and deadly brawl. Furious and acting on pure adrenaline, Fan Xuanmen grabbed a heavy decorative vase from a nearby table and lunged directly at him. During the frantic physical struggle, Yu Fanrong easily overpowered the heavily pregnant woman. He pushed her backward, wrapped his large hands tightly around her fragile neck, and used his full body weight to press her down onto the floor. He squeezed her throat with terrifying, unstoppable force, completely cutting off her oxygen supply. He ignored her desperate thrashing as she fought fiercely for her own life. He maintained his lethal grip until her body went completely limp, deliberately extinguishing the lives of both the young woman and the innocent child she carried inside her. When the frantic thrashing finally ceased, a suffocating silence descended upon the apartment. Yu Fanrong slowly released his paralyzing grip, his chest heaving as the adrenaline that had fueled his murderous rage began to evaporate. He stared down at the lifeless body of Fan Xuanmen crumpled on the living room floor. The terrifying reality of his actions crashed over him. He had just strangled his pregnant mistress to death with his bare hands. Panic briefly fluttered in his chest, but it was rapidly extinguished by a chilling, overwhelming instinct for self-preservation. He was a highly educated, affluent corporate executive with a respectable family and a lucrative career. He knew with absolute certainty that if the authorities discovered this corpse, his comfortable life would instantly end, and he would inevitably face the ultimate punishment. Surrendering to the police was completely out of the question. He had to make her vanish. His mind shifted into a state of cold, ruthless calculation. The narrative he needed to construct was obvious. Fan Xuanmen had finally packed her belongings and abandoned him to return to her rural hometown in Henan province, to sell this fabrication to his estranged wife, her friends, and eventually the police. He needed to remove all physical traces of her existence from the apartment. However, the immediate and most daunting obstacle was the body itself. He could not simply carry a heavily pregnant, deceased woman down the stairs of a densely populated residential complex without attracting the attention of his neighbors or the community security guards. He needed to break the problem down into manageable, transportable pieces. With a chilling detachment, Yu Fanrong grabbed Fan Xuanmen by her arms and dragged her dead weight across the floor, leaving the living room and pulling her into the small, confined space of the bathroom. He maneuvered her lifeless form into the porcelain bathtub, a location chosen specifically to contain the inevitable biological mess. He then walked into the kitchen, opening the drawers and assessing his utensils. He selected a heavy, broad, bladed meat cleaver, a common household tool meant for preparing dinner, which was now destined for a horrific purpose. Returning to the bathroom, Yu Fanrong stood over the tub. He looked down at the woman he had shared a bed with for years, and he looked at her swollen abdomen, carrying a child that, at this exact moment, he still firmly believed was his own biological flesh and blood. Yet, standing there with the heavy cleaver in his hand, he felt absolutely no remorse, no hesitation, and not a single shred of human compassion. His only focus was on saving himself from a murder conviction. In a display of unspeakable brutality, Yu Fanrong began the gruesome task of dismembering the body. Working methodically, he used the heavy blade to sever her head, her 2 arms, and her 2 legs, reducing the human being into 5 distinct, separate pieces. The physical exertion was immense, the bathroom echoing with the grim sounds of his labor. Once the horrific butchery was complete, he faced the next logistical challenge. He had to package the remains. He decided to divide the body to lower the risk of total discovery. He gathered some of the smaller, severed extremities, placed them into generic plastic garbage bags, and casually walked them down to the communal dumpsters located within the residential compound, tossing them away as if they were nothing more than ordinary household refuse. However, the torso presented a significant problem. Due to the advanced 8-month pregnancy, the victim's torso was incredibly heavy, bulky, and impossible to conceal in standard trash bags. Yu Fanrong walked into the bedroom and opened the linen closet. He pulled out a large, heavy, floral-patterned blanket. He returned to the bathroom and tightly swaddled the mutilated torso in the thick fabric, attempting to contain any remaining evidence. Next, he gathered a large, durable, woven bag, the kind typically used for moving heavy items or transporting agricultural goods. To further the illusion that Fan Xuan men had packed up and run away, he went through her closet and drawers, grabbing various articles of her seasonal clothing, ranging from summer shirts to winter coats. He stuffed these garments, along with a pair of rubber household gloves, into the woven bag alongside the blanket-wrapped torso. When it came time to seal the massive, heavy package, he encountered another minor obstacle. He searched the apartment for a piece of heavy-duty rope, but found that the only cords available were far too short to secure the wide mouth of the woven bag. Unfazed, Yu Fanrong simply reached back into her remaining wardrobe. He pulled out a one-piece dress and a pair of blue denim jeans. Twisting the garments into tight cords, he used her own clothing to tie a thick, secure knot around the opening of the bag, sealing the gruesome secret inside. With the packaging complete, the next phase of his cover-up began, the sanitization of the crime scene. He spent hours rigorously scrubbing the porcelain bathtub, flushing away the physical evidence. He wiped down the bathroom walls and bleached the floor tiles, desperate to erase the slaughter that had just occurred. He worked diligently, believing he was a master of deception, completely unaware that in his exhausted haste, he missed a single, long streak of blood that had seeped deep into the grout between the floral tiles. He then took the dull, blood-stained meat cleaver, disposed of it safely away from the apartment, and purchased a brand new one to seamlessly replace it in the kitchen block. He sat alone in the immaculate apartment, the heavy woven bag resting in the shadows as he meticulously plotted his final move. The only thing left to do was to find a place deep and dark enough to hide it forever. With the horrific dismemberment complete and the apartment scrubbed of obvious biological evidence, Yu Fanrong faced his final, terrifying logistical nightmare. The smaller extremities had already been discarded in the communal dumpsters, blending in perfectly with the daily refuse of hundreds of unsuspecting residential neighbors. But the torso, heavily swollen with an 8-month pregnancy and tightly sealed inside the heavy woven bag, was a glaring and undeniable anomaly. He knew he could not simply leave a package of that size in the neighborhood trash bins. The risk of a curious sanitation worker tearing it open was far too high. He desperately needed a disposal site that would swallow the damning evidence permanently. He immediately turned his attention toward the sprawling, murky expanse of the Huangpu River. The sheer physical exertion required to manually move the bag was immense. He waited patiently inside the apartment until the chaotic rush-hour traffic of the residential complex finally subsided. Grabbing the thick makeshift handles he had fashioned from the twisted clothing of Fan Xuanmin, he hauled the massive weight out of his front door and dragged it into the elevator. When he reached the brightly lit ground floor lobby, he inevitably encountered a few familiar faces. Neighbors who recognized him as the polite, highly successful insurance executive offered casual greetings, their eyes briefly lingering on the enormous bundle he was struggling to maneuver. Without missing a single beat, Yu Fanrong deployed his carefully rehearsed lie. He offered a warm, relaxed smile and casually explained that he was simply moving some old, heavy belongings out of the apartment to make room for brand new furniture. His demeanor was completely calm, showing absolutely zero signs of panic, sweat, or physical distress. The neighbors nodded in polite understanding and walked away, completely unaware they were standing mere inches away from a slaughtered pregnant woman. Having successfully navigated his immediate community without raising a single alarm, he loaded the gruesome cargo into a vehicle and drove toward the commercial waterfront. He arrived at a bustling ferry terminal that serviced the massive waterway. Carrying the oversized woven bag onto the crowded public vessel required an astonishing level of cold, psychopathic calculation. He purchased his standard ticket and boarded the ferry, blending in perfectly with the late-night commuters, tired laborers, and oblivious tourists. As the heavy ferry detached from the dock and its massive engines began to violently churn the dark water, Yu Fanrong purposefully navigated away from the brightly lit passenger seating areas. He hauled the heavy bag toward the rear-viewing deck, a dimly lit and mostly deserted section of the boat, where the roaring mechanical noise completely drowned out the sounds of the surrounding metropolis. He stood silently by the rusted metal railing, staring down into the freezing, turbulent currents of the river below. He waited patiently for the perfect moment, meticulously ensuring there were no wandering deckhands or observant passengers nearby. Then, using every ounce of his remaining adrenaline and strength, he hoisted the heavy woven bag over the safety barrier. It hit the dark water with a heavy splash and rapidly sank beneath the surface, swallowed completely by the relentless flow of the Huangpu River. The exact location where he dropped the remains was roughly 0.6 miles away from the Shiliupu dock, falling perfectly within the original search radius established by marine experts months earlier. Unfortunately, during their initial aquatic sweep, the search team simply did not have the exact coordinates needed to locate the package before the shifting tides moved it to the embankment. Back in the sterile, windowless confines of the interrogation room, the agonizing confession finally concluded. Yu Fanrong sat, slumped and utterly defeated in his metal chair. The investigative team listened in absolute, horrified silence. The sheer brutality of the physical crime was one terrible thing, but the chillingly emotionless and methodical manner in which he disposed of his mistress, along with the unborn child he firmly believed was his own flesh and blood, left the seasoned detectives deeply disturbed. Following the detailed confession, the police immediately transitioned from interrogation to active evidence recovery. Under heavy armed police escort, Yu Fanrong was forced to physically retrace his murderous steps. He led the detectives back to the exact residential dumpsters where he had casually tossed the smaller extremities. Because nearly 10 months had passed since that freezing night, the local sanitation department had long since emptied those specific bins. However, armed with his precise timeline and municipal records, authorities launched a massive, highly targeted excavation at the Central City landfill. Against incredible odds, the grueling search through mountains of compacted garbage eventually yielded the missing physical remains of Fan Xuanmin. The recovered physical evidence, the matching floral blanket positively identified by his estranged wife, and his own meticulously detailed audio confession, formed an indestructible, airtight legal case against the former insurance executive. He had spent 10 months believing he had committed the absolute perfect crime, seamlessly slipping back into his comfortable suburban life as a loving, reformed husband. He truly thought he had successfully buried his darkest, most violent secret beneath the murky waters of Shanghai. The legal proceedings against the former corporate executive moved with swift and uncompromising severity. Yu Fanrong, once a highly respected figure in the lucrative insurance sector, now stood before a stern judge as one of the most reviled criminals in the recent history of the city. The prosecution presented an absolutely airtight narrative to the court, entirely backed by overwhelming forensic evidence, meticulously gathered cellular phone records, and his own extensive, recorded confession. The packed courtroom listened in stunned, breathless silence as the lead prosecutor painstakingly detailed the exact timeline of the horrific night of January 11, 2010. The legal team painted a chilling, unforgettable portrait of a man who possessed a terrifying psychological duality. He was a man fully capable of successfully maintaining the polished, socially acceptable facade of a remorseful, loving husband, while simultaneously harboring the capacity to violently strangle his pregnant mistress and systematically dismember her lifeless body in his pristine residential bathroom. The most devastating and emotionally charged piece of evidence presented during the trial was the physical presentation of the floral patterned blanket. It had been identified without a single moment of hesitation by his own legally wedded wife. Her tragic realization that she had been sleeping in the same apartment, completely oblivious to the slaughter that had occurred just a few feet away, permanently destroyed his carefully constructed alibi and publicly exposed the profound depths of his monstrous deception. When the complete, unedited details of the crime were officially released to the general public, the collective reaction was one of sheer, unadulterated horror. The citizens of Shanghai, and eventually the entire nation as the story spread through major publications, were captivated and deeply disturbed by the sheer brutality of the act. The most horrifying aspect for the public to mentally process was the undeniable psychological reality of the murderer at the exact moment the brutal crime was committed. When Yu Fanrong violently wrapped his large hands around the fragile throat of Fan Xuanmin, and later when he took a heavy steel cleaver to her lifeless body, he firmly and absolutely believed that the unborn child she carried was his own biological offspring. He did not merely murder a troublesome, demanding mistress to selfishly protect his comfortable, affluent lifestyle and his lucrative professional career. He callously and methodically annihilated what he genuinely thought was his own flesh and blood. He bound the innocent, fully developed unborn child tightly within a heavy household blanket and deliberately submerged it in the freezing, murky depths of the Huangpu River. He had successfully extinguished 2 human lives in a single, monstrous act of absolute self-preservation, displaying a level of profound, incurable psychopathy that deeply rattled the foundational safety of the local community. Faced with the undeniable, towering mountain of physical and testimonial evidence, the legal defense team had virtually no strategic room to maneuver. The presiding judge ultimately handed down the most severe and irreversible punishment available under the criminal justice system for the charge of intentional homicide, specifically characterized by its exceptional cruelty and profound malice. Yu Fanrong was officially sentenced to death. Despite the ultimate finality of this supreme legal verdict, a fierce, passionate debate instantly erupted across the public sphere and various media platforms. Countless outraged citizens vehemently argued that even the ultimate punishment of the death penalty felt woefully inadequate, given the uniquely monstrous nature of his calculated actions. They passionately argued that a swift, painless execution could never truly balance the moral scales of justice for a privileged man who had physically ripped a young woman into pieces and discarded his own supposed child like common household garbage. The sheer, terrifying lack of basic humanity he displayed left a permanent, incredibly dark stain on the collective consciousness of the bustling metropolis. This gruesome dismemberment case ultimately stood as a powerful, enduring testament to the relentless dedication and advanced forensic capabilities of the Chinese law enforcement agencies. The specialized task force had faced intense public pressure and widespread skepticism during the agonizing, frustrating months when the investigative trail seemed completely and permanently cold. Yet, through rigorous scientific analysis, sprawling genetic databases, and incredibly tireless interrogation tactics, they successfully unraveled a practically invisible crime that had been designed to be the perfect murder. Beyond the undeniably brilliant police work, this heartbreaking tragedy serves as a grim and timeless warning about the profound, destructive dangers of deep deception and the absolute, critical necessity of strict emotional control. It clearly highlights the catastrophic, irreversible consequences of cowardly living a double life and violently refusing to take responsibility for one's own choices. In any intense, escalating interpersonal conflict, the person who successfully maintains their calm composure is the one who truly survives. Allowing a single, fleeting moment of blind, all-consuming rage to entirely dictate your actions can completely and permanently destroy your entire life, along with the lives of every single person around you. The dark, shifting waters of the Huangpu River eventually surrendered their terrible secrets, ensuring that the horrifying truth would never remain buried forever. Thank you so much for watching this entire video. The sheer cruelty of this case is truly difficult to fully comprehend, especially considering the tragic fate of the innocent unborn child. Do you think the death penalty was a sufficient punishment for the monstrous crimes committed by the wealthy executive, or did he deserve something even more severe? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming true crime investigations. See you next time.